Jack sat in the small room, with his hands pressed tight against the cold table. He looked at the map on the wall and saw the lines of stars that marked the colonies. Each light seemed so far and yet so close to him. He felt a pull deep inside, like something was wrong, like the lights would not stay forever. He took a breath and told himself it was only fear, but fear never left him. Claire walked through the halls of the research station, her eyes heavy from long hours. She held a stack of papers and old records that few cared to read. She felt the same pull as Jack, though she did not know him. She had read strange signals captured by the listening posts. Faint and broken voices carried through the dark. They spoke of warning. They spoke of fire, yet the leaders dismissed them and called them errors of old machines. Jack left his room and walked across the base. He saw other young men laughing and playing, but his mind was not at peace. He looked up at the sky. The stars above were calm and bright, but he thought they were too quiet to still. He told his friend Ben that something was wrong. Ben only laughed and said Jack was thinking too much, but Jack could not let it go. Claire stayed late in her lab that night. She watched the signals again. She traced the shapes on paper she wrote down. Each strange sound she felt as if someone was crying out in pain far away, like a mother losing her children. She closed her eyes and tried to rest, but the sound stayed in her head, like a whisper that would not leave her. Jack sat with the pilots the next morning. They were told to be ready for new orders. The commanders spoke in calm voices. They said the colonies were safe. They said nothing could reach them. Jack listened, but he did not believe them. He felt the air heavy with fear, though no one spoke of it. Claire met with the old professor on the station. He was one of the few who still believed in science. He told her that long ago, other warnings had come before great storms of war. But each time the leaders turned their faces away. She asked what they should do, and he said only that they must remember the past, or the past would come. Again, Jack flew training runs with his squadron. He pushed his craft hard. He wanted to be ready for something he could not name. The others mocked him for his worry, but deep down, they felt it too. The quiet in the stars was not right. He looked out of his window and felt the space pressing on him like a hand waiting to close. Claire sent a message to the council. She wrote that the signals must be taken as real, that danger was coming. She begged them to prepare, but her words were filed away and forgotten. She stood by the window and watched the stars. She whispered that she would not stop, even if no one believed her. Jack and Claire did not know each other yet, but they both felt the same. Shadow moving closer, they both felt the weight of silence and the fear of what was coming in the nights. Jack dreamed of stars going dark one by one. Claire dreamed of a voice that cried for her children. Both woke with sweat, and both knew they were not only dreams. The first sign came without warning, the night sky above. A far colony lit with fire and then went dark. No message, no cry for help, only silence spread across the channels. Jack heard the report as he sat with his squad. He felt his chest grow tight. Claire saw the same report on her screen. She dropped her papers and stood frozen. She whispered that it had begun. The leaders gave no answer. They told the people to stay calm. They told the fleets to stand ready, but inside the war rooms fear was strong. Jack knew the truth, even without words. Claire knew it too. They both looked to the stars and felt the wrath waiting beyond, ready to fall on them all. Jack stood on the landing field. The sound of engines filled the air. Men moved fast around the ships, preparing them for what none would name. He felt his heart beat hard in his chest. He wanted to run, but his feet stayed planted. He looked at the sky again, the stars still calm and bright. Yet he felt the same weight pressing on him. A storm was coming, and he knew it. Claire worked through the night, her eyes red from no rest. She watched the new records from the broken colony. She saw nothing but dark silence. She held her head in her hands and thought of the warning she had seen in the signals. She knew the voice she had heard was real. She wrote again to the leaders, but no one gave her an answer. They only told her to stay with her work and leave fear behind. Jack listened to the commanders. They spoke of order and discipline. They said the fleets would protect the people. They said no harm would reach them. Jack heard the words, but felt no trust. The men around him laughed to hide their fearsome, whispered of the queen, who had come to claim what was hers. Jack said nothing. He only tightened his grip on his helmet and waited for the command to launch. Claire walked through the long hall of the station. She saw the faces of the workers and the guards. Each face was pale, With the same fear that no one would speak, she stopped at a window and looked out the stars. Shone without sound, and she whispered that they were not safe. Anymore, she thought of the voice again. She thought of the mother who cried for her children. She wondered what wrath would come when that cry turned to rage. Jack was sent out with his squad. The ships rose into the sky and broke into the dark above. The world, he felt the stillness of space around him, the radio full of orders and numbers, but his eyes stayed on the stars. He thought he saw a flicker far off, a shape too vast to name. Then it was gone, and only silence remained. He asked his leader if anyone else had seen it. No one answered. Claire found the old professor again. He told her of stories from long ago, of times when queens had risen from shadows to claim the stars, and each time men had fought and bled, and each time the people had held the line. She asked if it would be the same. Now he only said that the past always came again for those who refused to learn it. She felt cold at his words, but also strong inside. She knew she must not stop. Jack dreamed again that night. He saw fire sweep across the stars. He saw men falling and ships torn apart. He woke with sweat on his face and his chest tight. He sat up in his bed and looked through the small window. He thought he saw eyes watching him from the dark. Endless eyes full of sorrow and rage. He closed the blind and sat in silence until the call for duty came. Claire sat alone in her lab. She traced the signals once more. She drew the shapes on her paper, lines that told of storms and war. She felt the voice again, now stronger than before. It was no longer only a cry. It was a vow. She held her breath and whispered that the queen was coming. She told herself she would find a way to warn the people, even if no one believed her. Jack flew again the next day. The squad spread wide. Across the void, they searched for any trace of the lost colony. He looked down at the dark world where once lights had shone, and now only dust remained. He felt the weight in his chest and thought of his home. He swore that if the queen came, he would fight until his last breath. Claire stood before the council. She begged them to prepare. She said the signs were too strong to ignore. She said the people must be warned. They shook their heads and told her to be silent. They feared the people more than the storm. They thought panic would destroy order. She left the hall with fire in her chest. She swore she would not let silence be the end. Jack and Claire did not yet know each other, but both felt the shadow grow closer. Jack in his ship and Claire in her lab. Both knew the queen had begun her march across the stars. Both knew wrath would soon fall, and humanity would face the trial that no one wished to speak aloud. Jack stood with his squad on the deck, the air heavy with fear and smoke. News had come that more colonies had fallen. Whole cities gone without a word. Men whispered that nothing could stop the queen and her wrath. Jack listened, but kept silent. He held his helmet close and thought of his home. He swore that he would not let it be taken without a fight. Claire sat in her lab, her eyes tired but still sharp. She worked day and night on the signals she had gathered. The voices grew louder each day. They carried pain and fury, but also warning. She traced every wave and line with her pen. She filled page after page with strange shapes and broken cries. She told herself that the people must hear the truth, even if the council closed their ears. Jack joined the drills each day. The men trained with weapons and ships, their faces pale but their hearts steady. He pushed himself harder than the rest. He wanted to be ready. When the storm broke, his friend Ben told him to rest. But Jack only shook his head. He said he could rest when the fight was done, if the fight ever ended. Claire tried again to speak to the leaders. She stood in the chamber and raised her voice. She told them the wrath was real, that the queen was near. She said silence would kill more than any blade. They looked away and told her to leave. They feared her words more than the storm. She left the chamber with fire in her chest. She swore she would not be silent. Jack flew with his squad into the void. They searched for any trace of life near the broken colonies. The stars were silent. The worlds below, nothing but ash. He felt his chest grow tight and his hands shake. He thought of the people who once lived, their families. Children, workers, all gone. He swore again he would not let the same fate take his home. Claire walked through the station. She saw the people working, but she saw no hope in their eyes. They knew something was wrong, but no one would speak it aloud. She stopped at a window and looked out. The stars were cold, and still she whispered to herself that defiance must rise, that the people must stand, or all would fall. She pressed her hand to the glass and swore she would fight with her voice until the end. Jack met with his commander, who told the squad they must prepare for open war. The queen had begun to move across the stars, and no wall would hold her back. Jack listened and nodded. He felt fear in his chest, but also fire in his heart. He told his squad they must fight not for glory, but for the people, who had no arms to fight for themselves. Claire found the professor again. He told her of the past, when men and women had stood together against storms greater than themselves. He said the strength of people was not in leaders or weapons, but in unity. She felt his words burn inside her. She left with a new will. She would not ask the leaders for aid. She would speak to the people. She would tell them the truth and give them the fire they needed. Jack flew another mission this time. Not for search, but for defense. The Queen had sent her first strike against a border world. Jack and his squad met it in the sky. The battle shook his craft and tore the black open with fire. He lost 2 men, but held the line. He felt grief like a blade in his chest, but he did not let it break him. He swore their names would not be lost. Claire spoke to the workers. She told them what she had seen and what she had heard. She told them the wrath was coming, and that they must rise, not wait. She told them that each hand, each heart, each voice would matter. They listened, and though they feared, they also began to hope. She saw fire in their eyes, where before there had been only silence. Jack returned to the base, his ship scarred, and his heart heavy. But when he saw the people gathering with tools and arms in their hands, he felt a new strength. He saw that the fight would not only be of soldiers, but of all who lived under the stars. He knew then that humanity would not fall silent. They would rise as one. Claire stood at the front of the hall. Filled with men and women, she spoke of defiance and of the will to live free. She said no queen, no wrath, no storm could take the spirit of their kind. She saw them stand tall and answer with their voices. She felt tears in her eyes, but she did not let them fall. She raised her hand and swore they would fight together. Jack and Claire still did not know each other yet, but both carried the same fire. Jack with his squad in the sky, and Claire with her voice among the people. They both stood ready for the storm. They both swore that humanity would not kneel, no matter how strong the Queen, no matter how fierce her wrath. Humanity would stand and fight. Jack stood on the ramp of his ship. The sky above the world burned with fire. The Queen had come with all her wrath, and no shield could hold her back. He watched as the ground shook under the weight of her power. The men beside him held their weapons tight, but he saw the fear in their eyes. He felt it too, yet he did not turn away. He knew this was the fight they had waited for. Claire stood in the great hall of the station. Her voice rang out over the crowd. She told them the storm had come, and that no wall of leaders could save them. She told them they must stand with their own hands, their own will. She saw the fear in their faces, but she also saw the spark of fire growing. She lifted her arms and said, they must rise as one or all would be lost. The people answered her with a cry that filled the hall like thunder. Jack flew with his squad into the black sky ships. Clashed in fire and steel, the Queen struck with waves of force that tore whole lines apart. His ship shook as if the stars themselves were breaking. He lost more men that day, but he kept flying. He drove his ship into the heart of the storm and fired until his hands bled. He swore with each breath that he would not fall while his people still lived. Claire worked without rest. She led the workers who turned drills into weapons. She stood with the farmers who made armor from plows. She helped the students who trained with rifles in the empty halls. She saw fear, but she also saw courage. Each face carried the will to fight. She felt her heart grow strong with them. She swore that she would never stop until the last light was gone. Jack landed only to rise again, each battle heavier than the last. The Queen tore cities apart. Oceans boiled and skies burned. He watched men fall by the thousands, but still they rose again. He felt grief in his chest, but fire in his heart. He told his squad that as long as they could fly, they would hold the line. He told them the Queen could break their ships, but not their spirit. Claire found the professor once more. He sat weak with age, but his eyes burned bright. He told her that the storm was at its peak, and that soon it would break. He said that in the darkest hour, the strength of people would shine brightest. She held his hand and promised she would carry his words to the end. He smiled and told her she had already done so. Jack fought in the sky above the last stronghold. The Queen came down herself. The stars bent and the ground split with her fury. Jack felt his ship break apart. He fell into fire, but still he rose on foot with weapon in hand. He led the men through the ruins. Their voices strong, even as the world crumbled, they shouted that they would not kneel, that they would not break. Claire stood before the people on the last world, she told them. This was the final stand, she said. The queen would come with all her wrath, but they would meet her as one. She saw the people raise their arms. Their eyes filled with fire. She felt the weight of the storm pressing on her, but she did not falter. She raised her voice until it carried over the walls and into the night. She told them that no mother, no queen, no ruler could take their spirit. Jack reached the field where the final battle raged. He saw the queen rise from the fire, her form vast, her eyes burning with sorrow and rage. He felt fear strike through him, but he held his ground. He lifted his weapon and cried out that he would stand until the end. The men around him lifted their voices with his, and together they faced her wrath with nothing but will. Claire heard the roar of the battle from the city. She stood among the people and raised her, and she cried out that they were not broken. She cried out that they were the children of the stars, and that they would live free or die free. Her voice rang through the night, and the people answered her with a cry so strong it shook the walls. Jack fought until his arms could move no more. He saw men fall beside him, but he saw them rise again with fire in their eyes. He knew then that no power could truly break them, not while they stood as one. He felt the ground shake and the sky burn, but he kept his feet. He swore that even if the queen struck him down, his spirit would not be taken. Claire stood with the crowd, their voices a storm of their own. She felt the wrath pressing down on them all, but she did not bend. She raised her head to the burning sky and swore that they would endure. She swore that the spirit of her people would not be erased. No matter the fire, no matter the storm, they would stand eternal. Jack stood on the broken field. The sky was torn with fire, and the ground split under the weight of the queen. He held his weapon tight, though his arms were weak. His body bruised and bloodied, he would not fall. He looked at the men beside him, their faces black with smoke, yet their eyes bright with fire together. They waited for the storm to strike again. Claire stood at the wall of the last city. The people gathered around her. She raised her hand and told them they would not break. She told them the queen could shatter stone and burn sky, but she could not take their spirit. Her voice rang out over the roar of battle. The people answered her with a cry that shook the air. She felt her chest heavy with fear, but stronger still with fire. She swore she would not bend. Jack lifted his head as the queen rose above them, her form vast, her eyes burning with sorrow and rage. She struck with force that shook the stars. Jack fell to his knees, but still he rose. He shouted with his last breath that they would not kneel. His voice carried over the field, and the men rose again. Each voice joined his until the roar drowned out the storm. Claire felt the ground shake. The queen pressed down with fury that turned night into day, yet the people stood strong. She saw children lift their voices with their parents. She saw workers hold tools like swords. She saw fear, but stronger still, she saw courage. She shouted again that no queen, no ruler, no mother could erase them. They were bound by wills stronger than fire. Jack pressed forward step by step. His legs weak but his heart full, he fired again and again until his weapon broke. He threw it aside and lifted his fists, shouted that even barehanded he would stand. His voice raw but strong. The men followed him forward into the blaze, their cries a storm of their own against the fury above. Claire fell to her knees, but not from fear. She fell to raise her hands to the sky. She called out to the queen. She told her that they were her children, ill too, but not to be ruled, not to be broken. They were children of the stars, free and eternal. She shouted that they would live free or die free, and the people answered her in one voice that carried through the burning night. Jack looked up through smoke and flame. He saw the queen pause. Her fury slowed her eyes. No longer only rage, but sorrow. He felt the storm ease. For a breath he stood tall, though his body near to falling. He told her that they would never bow, that they would rise again and again until the end of time. The men lifted their voices with his, and the air filled with fire and defiance. Claire rose to her feet. Her voice still strong, she told the people to hold for one more breath, one more step, one more stand. She told them that even if the walls fell, they would not be lost. She told them their spirit was the true wall, stronger than any stone. The people lifted their arms and voices and filled the air with their cry. Jack saw the queen lower her hand. The fire in the sky grew dim. He felt the ground steady. The storm no longer pressed down. He stood with his men, and waited, but no strike came. The queen looked upon them with eyes no longer of wrath, but of knowing. He saw her turn her face away, and the stars grew still. Once more Claire saw the light fade. She felt the air grow calm. She stood in silence with the people. Then she lifted her hand and told them they had endured. She told them they had shown the truth, that no power could erase their will. The people cheered not for victory, but for defiance, for the spirit that had not been broken. Jack stood with his squad, what remained of them, torn and weary, but unbowed. He looked at the sky and saw the stars, once more still and calm. He thought of the men lost. He thought of the fire that had carried them through. He swore that their names would not fade. They would be carried in every voice that rose in defiance. Claire walked among the people. She saw their faces, tired yet bright. She felt her own body heavy with pain, but her spirit was strong. She whispered that they had stood eternal. She whispered that no storm, no queen, no ruler could ever take that away. She raised her head and looked at the stars. She swore that humanity would rise again, no matter what shadow came. Jack and Claire at last met in the silence after the storm. They looked at each other, both worn and scarred, yet unbroken. They spoke no words, for none were needed. They both knew the truth. They both knew that humanity had faced the greatest wrath and had not fallen. They both knew that as long as one voice remained, humanity would stand eternal.